So we've been studying about the next generation, inspiring our children to be faithful servants of God. And you remember last week we had kind of really the last 2 weeks talked about the various stages of life, infancy and on. And last week we ended up talking about those teen years, or maybe our high school students, and what faithfulness is going to look to that like and what hopefully has transpired and talked about. You remember 2 weeks ago we talked about Jesus, and at the age of 12, his mom and dad went up to Jerusalem for one of the festivals, and he stayed behind. They didn't realize it, and he was found in the temple conversing with the scribes and the Pharisees, and they were amazed at his skill, right? The level of his ability to communicate with them about spiritual things. And we found that Iraq that was at about the age of 12, and we went back through a little bit of study and realized that for Jewish children and the boys here we're talking about, primarily when it comes to the specific education, was their mother was responsible to them for from the age of birth until 5, and we know what happened, right? The songs, the readings to them, the encouragement about the very basic things, and laying that groundwork or that foundation. And then at 5 started the regular instruction about the law, and they were taught like we would think of our school system as to the workings of the law. And then at age 12, they become responsible for that. It's almost like an age of accountability. You and I would think about an age 13, they are considered mature or a man as it relates to the law, and they are responsible for this now. And so all of that training that they have received now is thrust upon them in action and in duty. And we talked about our own children when they reach that age of teen. We can think of the very same pattern, right? A mother will nurture that child and give it the basics and teach that child those rhymes and those songs that set a baseline or a foundation. And then we strive to educate them about Jesus and about, it's no longer the law or just the law, if you will, but it's the gospel. It's all that encompasses that. And then when they become of a certain age, they become responsible for it. And they start to put these things into practice. And remember, in Paul's letter to Timothy, he tells him, chapter 4, verse 12, there's really 5 areas that one needs to be concerned as a young person about conducting themselves. And that's in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. And we talked about those aspects of that in our faithfulness, or their faithfulness to that last week. And so, and remember, we talked about Proverbs chapter 3, 9 through 18, where it talks about wisdom and personifies wisdom as a female, says her. And so there's this great relationship as these young people grow and mature. Hopefully, we set the foundation, we give them the education, and then we start to these things are not just introduced anymore, but they're enacted upon. And so they start to live that thing. And of course, with that comes their example in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. And I think sometimes we kid ourselves about maturity and where we really start to make an impact. I think a huge and great impact can happen with our children when they start to have influence on their peer group, when friends are picking friends, and our children can have a tremendous impact on their friends or on their neighbors. And so we need to prepare them with earnest and example them and show them the way so that they can achieve and do all that God wants them to do or to be. Any thoughts about that before we move on to new material? So considering bringing them up in the faith, bringing them up in perhaps habits to build faith. I'd like us to turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, if you will. And we've got 2 passages here today, a fair bit of reading, but I make it interesting. But let's look and use a little bit of comparison. I warned you about this last week, and I don't think I'm stretching too hard here. But, there's likenesses in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And this is one that we don't talk about a whole lot of real often, and it's not we need likeness that we can and just learn from it and go on. So, if you will, start reading with me in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 1. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 1, and we'll stop a few places along the way here. If you have comment, please get a hold of me or get my attention so that I don't miss you. Now, this is the commandment, the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, that you might do them in the land where you are going to possess it. Remember, this is Deuteronomy, and so we're looking forward here. They've come out of Egypt. They're going to possess this land after they take it by force. And so here's the instructions, verse 2, so that you and your sons, or son, and your grandson might fear the Lord your God to keep his statutes and his commandments, which I commanded you all the days of your life, and that your days might be prolonged. You know, there's a lot there in verse 2, right? Does God want our children to be faithful as much as he wants us to be faithful, right? And we talked a little bit last week about generational faithfulness and the benefit of that when a young person can not only have a father and a mother that are faithful, but have grandparents that are also faithful, or maybe not even by blood, but within the Lord's kingdom, there are elderly or grandmotherly people that can influence that young person. What a privilege. What a benefit that many of us did not have, right? And so he's desiring that here, even in Deuteronomy chapter 6, this multi-generational faithfulness. And was that the way it always was? No, we started this study by saying what? There rose up a generation that did not know God. And so this is exactly what he wants. He wants multi-generational, faithful people to him. Verse 3, O Israel, you should listen and be careful to do it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. What do we call that? Verse 5. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. The great commandment. Jesus has asked that, right? During his ministry. He said, what is the most important law or the most important command? He says, it's that one. Matthew 22, verse 36. And he quotes Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. And he says what? All of it hinges on this. And so can we do what God wants and not love him? I mean, that would be like a legalistic approach only, right? Like, this is what I have to do, this is what I'm going to do. Or is it better to love God and do it? That's what he desires, right? Just harkens back to the Old Testament sacrifices. Does God take pleasure in the smell or the aroma of burning flesh? No. But the loving attitude of sacrificing to him, that's what he desires. That's the aroma that he is desiring to have. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Verse 6, these words, which I am commanding you today, shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Then it shall come about, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which he has sworn to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you great and splendid cities which you did not build, and houses full of good things which you did not fill, and hewn cisterns which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you eat and are satisfied. Isn't it interesting that God is going to give them a land of milk and honey? And remember, when the spies went into this land, they brought back what report? It's all that is said and more, right? they were incredibly impressed. And yet there was the giants that resided there, and we are small people, and we can't take them, and there was indecisiveness, and it cost them, right? 40 years of wandering. But they're being told here, you're going to talk about these things when you come and go. You're going to write them down. You're going to have them on your lip basically all the time. But you're going to come into a land that you did not work for. And I guess part of the imagery or the jump that I want to make today is they were coming out of slavery, right? They were held under Pharaoh's thumb. And God said, I'm going to bring my people out. And he works these marvelous signs and these wonders. And he brings them out of that condition. You and I have been brought out of the condition of a slavery as well, and that's slavery to sin. And so we have been delivered as well. Not so much by Moses and his signs, but by Jesus and fulfilling the law and becoming the sacrifice that we needed to come back into God's presence. And I think this land that the children are headed to, that is flowing with milk and honey, that has all these splendid things that they have not worked for, that they have not dug, hewn, planted, raised, tended, whatever. You and I kind of share in those same circumstances, is that when we come into the kingdom, we have blessings, and we have a place, and we have a home that we could never prepared for ourselves. We talked about a peace on Wednesday night. That peace would elude us if it weren't for God's blessing. If it weren't for the provisions that he has provided through his son's blood for you and I. And so you and I reside in a place that would be my argument. It's very much like the place that the children of Israel headed to, in that they didn't really work for it. God has been so good to them and is going to bless them in so many ways. And you and I share in a likeness of that. Verse 12, then watch yourself that you do not forget the Lord who brought you from the hand of the land of Egypt out of the house of slavery. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name. Now, you and I, when we read of the Old Testament account of God's people of this day, we get very frustrated, don't we? Because we see failure after failure after failure of them trying to follow God, or them slipping and serving other gods, or not following his statutes or his commandments, or even raising up for themselves leaders that draw them away from God. And you and I become very frustrated, I think, right? And we ask ourselves, what is wrong with this people? And yet that's our challenge today. That's our challenge, not to be swayed, not to turn to the left or to the right, but to remember all of these things, to not only that, but for our own posterity, but for that of our children. And I think sometimes we don't consider that our dropping the ball, if you will, literally, hurts the one that's coming behind us. And I think that's something that we really need to consider and think about. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name. Verse 14, you shall not follow other gods, any of the gods of the people who surround you. For the Lord your God in the midst of you is a jealous God. Otherwise, the anger of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth. Now, I said this imagery can go so far, right? Well, here we would probably have to reach out a little further. God is, he told this group of people, look, you follow and you chasten after me, you're going to prosper. You don't, you're going to suffer. And he very physically showed us that relationship through Old Testament scripture. I mean, they were carried off into captivity. Now, I don't stand here to tell you I think God's going to let us be carried off into captivity. But he will let us suffer because of wrongs that we do. He will try to chasten us. He will try to rectify within our lives the things that are wrong. And I think he does that through conscience. I think he does that through corrective natures of those around us. Hopefully there's ones that love us enough to come to us. I think he may allow us to flounder in our aspirations if they're without him. To maybe cause us to think about our priorities. So I don't think he's going to carry us off into slavery, but I think we might be troubled. And rightfully so. So, and think about this. Verse 14, you shall not follow other gods. Do you have to bow to an idol to follow a different God? I think that's what's so insidious about verse 5, the opposite of it, not loving God with all our heart, mind, and soul. If we fail in that, have we not idolized something else within our life? Have we not supplanted his spot? As the Christian, we put him there, and then we allow something else to push him out. And you name it. I mean, it could be some of the simplest things that we allow to do it. I mean, pursuit of wealth, notoriety, position of some type. I mean, we can think all the things that we would supplant the Lord with and give our attention to rather than him. And of course, the whole object here is we speak of these things to our children, right? We're going to look like hypocrites if we're speaking these things to our kids, but we're not living, right? And I tend to believe that if we're not living like verse 5 is asking us to do, we're probably not talking like to our children, like you would have us to do either. And so something to consider, this relationship between being released from the bonds of slavery, being released from the bonds of sin, our forefathers of old coming into the promised land, you and I entering into the kingdom, having all of these blessings, all of these provisions, and then not utilizing them, not executing verse 5 like we would. Any thoughts through verse 15? Yeah. John chapter 8, verse 34. John 8, 34. Jesus answered him, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. Romans chapter 6. Romans, in particular here in chapter 6, has just so much imagery back to this, talking about slave and sin and death. In verse 18, Romans chapter 6, verse 18, and having been freed from sin, you become slaves of righteousness, he says. Back in verse 4, therefore, we have been buried with him through the baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. The verse they're talking about that likeness that we have with Christ. Christ was raised up, died, went down into the tomb, as you and I go down into the water, come up anew. He was raised, the first of our brethren, or the first to be raised, and we likewise, and we are raised to live life anew, so that we too might walk in newness of life, verse 4. So we put that old man of sin off. And then verses 16 and following, do you not know that when you present yourselves to someone as slaves for obedience, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin resulting in death or of obedience resulting in righteousness. Verse 17, but thanks be to God that though you were slaves of sin, you became obedient from the heart to that form of teaching which you were committed. And then again, verse 18, and having been freed from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. In other words, we will serve something. And previously we served sin, and now he says we serve righteousness. And so I think Romans chapter 6 does a really good job of showing that balance or that likeness of the Old Testament and slavery to sin and you and I coming out of that, or slavery and then slavery to sin in the New Testament. So any thoughts about Romans chapter 6 or the verses we just looked at? Let's continue on. Verse 15. For the Lord your God in the midst of you is a jealous God. Otherwise, the anger of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth. Verse 16. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. You should diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God and his testimonies and his statutes, which he has commanded you. You shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may go in and possess the good land which the Lord swore to your fathers. Do you think a faithful Christian life has benefits in terms of, for example, happiness? The things that you and I... Well, what do people think about nowadays? Or what has man always been concerned about? Longevity of life, right? I don't meet many people that are saying, whatever. No, they take care of themselves. They try and extend their life. They want to be around here. I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's what a lot of us are concerned about. We're also concerned about being happy, right? We're concerned about having peace, not being riddled with worry all the time. And sometimes I think we can get in a mindset where worry just consumes us. And today we worry about this, and tomorrow we worry about something else, and the third day we worry about a third thing. The first is just as critical on the third day, but now we move on to a third thing. That's a worry wart, I think we call it, right? and it can just consume us. It can just take our time and our energy and our focus away from us. And we don't want that, right? Will a faithful life give us the things that we really want? I know that the Scripture says the Lord will chasten us, right? I know that if we're going to be Christ-like, we're going to be persecuted. I know that the sin that came into the world is causing this world to die, and we're part of that. And with that comes sickness and disease and all of these other things. Can we still live a happy life if we're faithful to God? Well, how else do you want to do it, right? When you really think about it. I see the things that come upon man. And man, if you don't have God in your life, I just scratch my head and I wonder how they handle it. I wonder how they cope. I mean, my heart just breaks for them. Because to the Christian, it's such a challenge, right? That terrible news or that diagnosis or the tumultuous thing that is affecting us. But we get to do it with God. We get to do it with his provisions in his kingdom that he has provided for you and I with our brothers and sisters, don't we? Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Yeah. And honestly, the concern will drive us to perform, right? If it, in the business world, if we're concerned about something, well, we're going to plan things out. We're going to try and achieve the situation to get us past that. We do the same thing with our faithfulness. We need to be prepared. We need to, in this case, we need to be talking to our children. We need to be getting them in a place where when the evil days come, they can achieve, they can overcome, because those days come. Do they not? Could any of us say, no, I haven't seen that? I think one of the biggest struggle, and I'm hoping the worst struggle of my life, when I was in my 20s. I don't ever want to see something like that again. And God willing, I won't. But I might. And so I want to be prepared for that part.
There's a little difference between happiness, knowing that, or what you're talking about is joy we can have that peace. It's a fast
Right. Right.
From being in Christ, the joy we should always have, no matter how terrible our day is, knowing that we're a child of God and that He's going to get us through whatever comes our way today. But happiness is more about, I got a raise today, or we got a new car, or something like that. Everybody experiences happiness, but not everybody knows that joy
Right.
that's special to a Christian.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
So I'd say we could turn to Matthew 6:28. And why are you worried about what is observed, how the lilies of the field grow? Do you not toil or do not spin? Yet I say to you, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. Now, that doesn't mean, don't do anything, don't prepare.
Right.
There was Joseph, he interpreted the dream that mentioned the 7 years of famine.
Right.
But there was also that 7 years of preparation.
Right.
So it's something that's, popping out to me is it's worry, but not worry into sin.
Right.
If you're concerned about something, prepare.
Right.
And
And so we as Christians would discern this, wouldn't we? And would give us that balance. Exactly. I think you're exactly right. Anybody else? Yeah, Dad.
Getting back to your thought of our family, said, a while back, when Paul was writing, he said, this is something we will feel like this is a command by example. It is. And then parents, so that's children, we put other things ahead of that. Sunday morning, we're setting an example that it permeates within the family, the physical family plus the church family. And it's not too far down the road that we've got a lukewarm congregation. It's not number one in life, and that's what Deuteronomy 6 is all about.
Right.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul.
Right.
That means He comes first.
Right.
And I know that in today's world, with everything that kids did, activities on Sundays now, and everything you see, that makes it difficult. That's where we have to stand up and be faithful to our God and to our children. What's really important,
Yep.
if they're going to be missed on Sunday morning, that activity is going to be appropriate.
Yeah. I personally think that we're desirous of so many things. If we put God first with perspective, we can have those things. If we put those things first, we cannot have God. It's just like the adage of that jar, and what are you going to put in it? And if you don't put the big thing in first, you put the little things in, the big thing will never fit. So definitely, I think it's a very good thought. Let's continue on now, verse 20. When your son asks you in time to come, saying, what do the testimonies of the statutes and the judgments mean, which the Lord our God commanded you? Then you shall say to your son, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us from Egypt with a mighty hand. Moreover, the Lord showed great and distressing signs and wonders before our eyes against Egypt, Pharaoh and all his household. He brought us out from there in order to bring us in, to give us the land which he had sworn to our fathers. So the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes and fear the Lord our God for our good always and for our survival. It will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all this commandment before the Lord our God, just as he commanded us. are going to be we're going to have kids that are inquisitive. There's times they're going to ask us, and times they're just going to watch with eyes wide open. And what is our answer going to be? And do you think that God's people back in this day, our forefathers, did they always do this? They did not. And we know they did not because they failed. Because there's times when the lesson wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, or the example did not exist that kept that next generation faithful. And they suffered greatly for it. Do you remember when Baxter Exum was here one time and talked about when one of the groups of God's children were led into slavery and the brutal nature that was? There's statues and carvings, I think, that he has seen in travels that depict this. And God's people were put in chains. Some were killed. Some were put in chains and led away in slavery, but their skin, in order to torture them, was removed from them. God has no desire for us to suffer that. He does not want that to happen. But just as our forefathers, and I say that loosely in relation to those people, left him and suffered greatly, we will suffer greatly if we leave him. It's just a matter of fact. We cannot come into his blessings. We cannot come into these provisions, into this land of milk and honey, if you will. Leave it and not suffer a tragic loss in this life or in eternity to come. So I think chapter 6 is just, it's talking to us as adults about talking to our children, about showing them and exempling for them all that God has done for us. You don't have to do it from a standpoint of God is making me do this. We should be able to do it from the standpoint of individuals that have been brought out of the slavery of sin and have a story to tell. Have a being raised up into a new life that we want to express to our children. And if we're not convicted of it enough to do that, we've got a problem. We need to reassess and march to the front here after this 40-some minute sermon I'm sure we're about to have. We have to know. We have to be convicted. And that's what he's begging for here in about verses 21 through 25. And so I think if we're committed, if we believe it and we're living it, it's going to be natural to pass it on. Any thoughts about chapter 6? Yeah, okay.
I'm going to say something about hardship. Good example, trees. Right? They're broken. If there is an absolutely perfect environment, they will actively be because they have not had that stress that has pushed them left.
The wind, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's the Lord will put us in situations that will allow us to serve Him better. And I guess a good example I think in my life is when my dad passed, it was rough. And everyone around here, supported me. And I really appreciate it. Well, fast forward months, one of my friends loses her mother. And I was in a very unique position to understand what they were going through to help support them. And it's one of those things where the Lord will put us in situations that He knows we're uniquely
Prepared for, sure. Yeah. Good thought. Anybody else? We're out of time. We're going to pick up in chapter 7, and we're going to go through the first 11 verses. You'd like to read that this week, but we're going to talk about that next week as we continue to hopefully inspire one another to continue to train up and teach our young people.